Let me ask you something that might sting. Have you ever seen someone with degrees on the wall and bookshelves full of knowledge fall for something utterly ridiculous, not just once, but repeatedly? Maybe it was a conspiracy theory, a pseudoscientific health fad, a political movement built on rage more than reason, or a trend that clearly lacked merit. You watched, confused, maybe even disappointed, and thought, but they're so smart, how could they believe that? Here's the hard truth. Education sharpens the mind, but it does not always awaken the soul. It teaches us how to calculate, evaluate, and analyze, but not always how to discern. And in a world where deception is dressed in sophistication, that lack of discernment becomes fatal. You see, foolish ideas do not come wrapped in foolish language. No, they wear the clothes of progress, science, justice, or innovation. They speak in TD talk tones, backed by charts and data and popular sentiment. And the educated, they're often the first to applaud, not because they've thought deeply, but because they fear seeming ignorant. They don't want to be left behind, so they nod, they share, they endorse, thinking it's wisdom when it's really just clever manipulation. But let's go deeper. Why do they fall for it? Because the most dangerous ideas aren't imposed. They are chosen, usually by those who believe they're too smart to be fooled. And that arrogance becomes their blind spot. The more educated someone is, the more likely they are to believe they've earned immunity from deception. That illusion of invincibility is where the poison seeps in. And still, we wonder, what about logic? What about reason? Shouldn't that protect them? Not when emotion overrides thought. Not when fear or identity is on the line. Because here's what most won't admit. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing what you feel to be true. Educated minds don't just fall for dumb ideas, they defend them eloquently, and because they speak well, others follow. This is the paradox of intellect. It arms people with tools of persuasion, but not always with the discipline to question their own motives. Sometimes educated people become defenders of foolishness simply because they can explain it better than others can attack it. Their words become shields and eventually cages. And then there's the seduction of belonging. Educated people often move in circles where agreement is a form of survival, where dissent is punished not with debate but with exile, so they conform, they compromise, they silence their questions. They call it nuance, but it's fear in disguise. Yet here's the most dangerous part. Dumb ideas often thrive because they are useful, not because they are true. They serve political agendas. They unite people against a common enemy. They create a sense of purpose, a cause, a crusade, and the educated, desperate to lead or be seen as virtuous, hitch their intellect to the cause, even if it drives off a cliff. They mistake popularity for truth. They forget that mass approval is not proof of righteousness. It is often the first symptom of manipulation. And so, societies fall not because fools rise, but because the wise refuse to challenge them. Now, pause with me here, because what I'm about to say isn't just observation. It's instruction. If you want to stay sane in an insane world, if you want to hold truth when others chase illusions, you must train your mind not just to think, but to see. See beyond credentials, see past the applause, see through your own bias. Ask not who said it, but what does it really mean, and who benefits if I believe it? You must be willing to stand alone, unpopular, even ridiculed, because truth is rarely fashionable at first. You must be courageous enough to admit when you're wrong and wise enough to spot when you're being used. And above all, never outsource your integrity. Don't hand it over to a movement, a party, a trend, or an influencer, no matter how many letters they have after their name. Your mind is your last line of defense against the madness of the crowd. Protect it with humility, sharpen it with skepticism, strengthen it with courage, because in the end it is not the absence of intelligence that ruins societies. It is the arrogance of intelligence unaccompanied by character. And still, we continue, because this sickness in thought is not limited to classrooms or conferences. It spills into the world where perception becomes currency, where appearances matter more than substance, where to look right matters more than to be right, and this creates a culture where the most theatrical ideas win, not because they solve problems, but because they create spectacle. Educated people, having mastered performance, play into this. They learn to speak in ways that signal virtue without demanding virtue. They learn to criticize everything but themselves. They mistake noise for leadership. And they win praise for repeating what others are too tired to challenge. But when the applause fades, the damage remains. So if we are to rebuild, not just our institutions, but our integrity, we must begin by dethroning this false god of appearance. We must value those who ask hard questions, not just those who give popular answers. We must reward clarity over complexity, wisdom over intellect, and substance over show. Let us not raise generations who know how to argue, but have forgotten how to think. Let us not create leaders who can win debates, but have lost their souls. Let us choose the slower, harder road of truth, not because it is easy, but because it is the only path that leads forward. The age of following dumb ideas must end. And it ends not with the uneducated, but with the brave. Would you like me to continue this into a final crescendo, or develop this into a longer written piece, such as an essay or book chapter? The illusion of intelligence is one of the most dangerous traps for the educated mind. It begins subtly, almost invisibly, with the belief that knowledge in one area of life confers authority in others. A person who has mastered mathematics, law, or literature may begin to believe their insights automatically extend to economics, politics, ethics, or even human nature itself. But intelligence, especially the kind measured by grades, titles, and accolades, is not synonymous with wisdom. In fact, it often acts as a barrier to it. The more someone is praised for being smart, the less inclined they are to question their thinking, and the more likely they are to protect their mental model at any cost, even if that model is flawed or dangerously outdated. Educated individuals are trained to process complex data, recognize patterns, and argue their positions effectively, but that training often favors retention over reflection. Academia, in particular, emphasizes correct answers over uncomfortable questions. Students learn what to think, not how to think independently. The system rewards conformity to established doctrines, whether scientific, philosophical, or ideological, and penalizes those who deviate from the accepted norms even when those norms are incorrect or incomplete. Over time, this process produces highly informed individuals who are deeply invested in the intellectual structures that raised them. When a new idea threatens that structure, they don't analyze it objectively, they attack it, because it endangers not just their beliefs but their very sense of self, worth, and identity. This psychological investment creates a cognitive rigidity masked as expertise. The educated begin to equate their intellectual status with moral and ideological superiority because they believe they've done the work, read the papers, passed the exams, debated the theories. They assume they must be on the right side of any issue. This is the illusion. They forget that human history is littered with examples of highly intelligent individuals who were catastrophically wrong. Entire civilizations have been led to ruin by brilliant minds who lacked wisdom, humility, or psychological self-awareness. Intelligence without emotional grounding or ethical clarity does not prevent error. It simply allows one to make more elaborate and persuasive mistakes. In fact, the more educated someone becomes, the more prone they may be to confirmation bias. Instead of seeking truth, they seek reinforcement. They consume ideas that align with what they already believe, selectively interpreting information to maintain their world-view. And because they're skilled in rational thought, they don't just accept ideas. They build arguments, frameworks, even entire systems around them. These systems become resistant to contradiction. They develop the illusion of objectivity, when in reality, they're fortified by ego. A dumb idea doesn't seem dumb when it's wrapped in elegant theory and supported by credentials. It becomes a fortress protected by the very intellect that should be deconstructing it. Another dimension of this illusion lies in the social nature of intelligence. Highly educated individuals often surround themselves with others who think the same way. Whether in universities, professional circles, or online forums, they form echo chambers that reflect their assumptions and shield them from dissent. This homogeneity further deepens the illusion that their shared beliefs are rational and universally valid. They mistake groupthink for consensus. The presence of mutual affirmation replaces the need for critical evaluation. In these circles, to question the dominant narrative is to invite suspicion, ridicule, or exclusion. Thus, even when doubts arise, they are suppressed, not through logical argument, but through social fear. Intelligence is often confused with verbal dexterity. A well-spoken idea, no matter how flawed, can carry immense persuasive power. Educated people, trained in rhetoric and presentation, can make even irrational beliefs sound reasonable. They use complex terminology, academic references, and persuasive analogies that create the illusion of depth. But beneath the surface, these arguments often lack substance. They are performances, not reflections. And because the performance is convincing, even other intelligent individuals are taken in by it, perpetuating the illusion further. The illusion of intelligence is dangerous because it convinces people that they are immune to being wrong. It creates a psychological armor that resists correction, cloaked in confidence and self-congratulation. The more educated someone is, the more they stand to lose if they admit they've been fooled, because doing so challenges not just a belief, but an identity carefully built over years of academic and professional achievement. So instead of adapting, they double down. Instead of questioning, they defend. The tragedy is not that they lack intelligence, but that their intelligence has become their prison. Emotional manipulation is one of the most potent forces behind the adoption of irrational ideas, especially among educated individuals who mistakenly believe that their reasoning skills make them immune to such influence. While logic appeals to the mind, emotion speaks directly to the heart, and in many cases it speaks louder. Even the most intellectually sophisticated people are still human beings first, driven by psychological needs for belonging, safety, purpose, and identity. These emotional needs often override rational thought, particularly when an idea resonates with deeply held fears, insecurities, hopes, or traumas. In such moments, the mind doesn't seek truth. It seeks comfort. And educated people, like anyone else, are often willing to trade clarity for emotional satisfaction. At the core of this manipulation lies the human tendency to construct identity around beliefs. Once a belief is tied to a person's self-concept, whether political, social, moral, or philosophical, any challenge to that belief becomes a perceived attack on their identity. Emotional attachment to beliefs means that arguments are no longer evaluated on their merit, but on how they make the individual feel. Educated people, who often pride themselves on their beliefs being informed or evidence-based, are particularly vulnerable when these ideas align with their sense of moral righteousness. They fall into the trap of thinking, if this feels just, then it must be true. Emotions become the lens through which truth is filtered, distorting facts until they fit the preferred narrative. This is why emotionally charged language is so effective. Movements, ideologies, or agendas that seek followers don't lead with data. They lead with stories. They don't argue. They evoke. A carefully crafted narrative that stirs outrage, hope, or fear will often gain more traction than a well-reasoned thesis, and the educated, ironically, are more likely to be drawn in precisely because they can interpret and amplify these stories with sophistication. They don't just believe, they become evangelists, using their skills to make emotionally charged ideas appear logical and unassailable. The emotional core is camouflaged by intellectual scaffolding. Fear is particularly powerful in this process. Whether it's fear of social collapse, environmental disaster, political oppression, or cultural erosion, the emotional pull of catastrophe suppresses critical thought. Fear activates survival instincts, and in that mode, even intelligent individuals default to binary thinking. Us versus them, good versus evil, safe versus dangerous. This black and white lens makes them more susceptible to simplistic or radical solutions that promise safety. They might rationalize these choices later, but the decision is emotional first. The brain looks for justifications to support what the heart has already decided. Hope, too, is a subtle manipulator. Utopian promises of equality, justice, peace, or innovation often lure educated people into supporting ideas without adequately questioning the costs. doffs, or feasibility, the emotional allure of being on the right side of history can overpower the discipline of skepticism. When an idea flatters their sense of intelligence, purpose, or morality, they are less inclined to scrutinize it. They believe because they want it to be true, and when disconfirming evidence arises, they reinterpret or dismiss it rather than reconsidering the idea itself. The desire to believe outweighs the responsibility to verify. Another emotional lever is guilt. Educated individuals are often aware of historical and social injustices, and that awareness can be weaponized. If an idea suggests that opposing it is a form of complicity in evil, many will accept it, not because the idea makes logical sense, but because rejecting it would trigger feelings of guilt or social shame. Emotional coercion replaces intellectual persuasion. The more educated someone is, the more they fear being labeled as insensitive, ignorant, or backward, so they comply, and in doing so, convince themselves that their emotional reaction was a rational choice. Identity politics, for instance, thrives on this emotional terrain. It doesn't just propose ideas, it assigns moral value to them. To believe a certain way is to be good, progressive, or enlightened. To disagree is to be regressive, ignorant, or hateful. Educated individuals, eager to preserve their moral image, often surrender reasoned analysis for emotional safety. They echo slogans and adopt positions not because they've examined them critically, but because they don't want to be seen on the wrong side of a social cause. Emotional manipulation doesn't silence reason, it hijacks it, steering it toward conclusions that protect self-image rather than truth. Even group dynamics feed into this process. Emotions are contagious, especially in intellectual communities where consensus is mistaken for correctness. When everyone in your peer group believes in a particular cause or theory, emotional pressure builds to conform. Educated people may fear social isolation, professional consequences, or public criticism if they dissent. This fear suppresses critical inquiry and promotes silent agreement. Eventually, the emotional pressure becomes internalized, and what began as social compliance becomes sincere belief. Educated people, for all their intelligence, are not protected from emotional vulnerabilities. They are often more skilled at hiding them. They use language, status, and theory to rationalize emotional decisions. But beneath the surface, the same primal forces are at work. The longing to belong, the fear of rejection, the need to feel good about oneself. Until those emotions are recognized and examined, even the most brilliant minds will continue to fall prey to the seduction of irrational, emotionally manipulative ideas. Power and perception operate as twin engines behind the adoption and spread of irrational ideas, particularly among the educated, who are often more concerned with how things appear than with how things are. In many intellectual and professional environments, perception is currency. The appearance of moral sophistication, social awareness, and intellectual nuance is valued more than the substance of what is actually being said or believed. Educated individuals, aware of the social rewards and reputational consequences of holding certain views, are often incentivized to adopt ideas not based on their truthfulness, but on their utility, how those ideas help them climb, belong, or avoid conflict. The question quietly shifts from, is this true, to does this make me look informed, compassionate, or progressive? In such climates, ideas are not evaluated on the basis of logic or empirical validation, but on how they serve power structures. An idea doesn't have to be valid, it just has to be useful. If it serves a narrative that strengthens an institution, uplifts a movement, or silences dissent, then it becomes powerful regardless of its merit. Educated individuals, particularly those in influential circles, are often among the first to align with these ideas, not because they're convinced, but because they recognize which direction the wind is blowing. They see which ideas are rewarded and which are punished, and they adapt accordingly. This behavior is not always conscious. Often, it's the product of a finely tuned survival instinct in elite environments where reputation determines access to influence, funding, and opportunity. In these environments, signaling becomes more important than sincerity. People adopt positions that project the right image, even if those positions are internally inconsistent or logically weak. Educated individuals are especially adept at this. With their command of language, they know how to couch even the most absurd ideas in sophisticated rhetoric. They understand the right jargon, the acceptable references, the performative indignation or empathy that must accompany their views. These performances are rarely challenged because the culture rewards appearance over truth. As a result, the loudest voices often belong not to the most thoughtful, but to the most performative. Power accumulates around those who master the optics. Irrational ideas often come bundled with social rewards. Supporting a fashionable ideology, no matter how flawed, might open doors. Professional connections, media attention, accolades, grants, or speaking invitations. It signals that one is part of the enlightened class. Conversely, challenging these ideas, even with well-reasoned critiques, can come with serious costs, career damage, social ostracism, or public shaming. The educated, knowing the risks, often choose silence or strategic agreement. Some convince themselves it's not worth the trouble. Others begin to genuinely believe the ideas over time through the psychological mechanism of cognitive dissonance. The mind justifies what the body does repeatedly. What begins as submission for survival becomes belief for comfort. Power structures exploit this. Institutions, political movements, and corporations learn how to manipulate perception to consolidate control. They recognize that if they can make an idea appear morally superior, urgent, or on the right side of history, they don't need to prove it. They just need enough influential people to endorse it publicly. Once those endorsements come from the educated class, the idea gains legitimacy. Others fall in line, not because they've thought critically, but because the cost of dissent appears too high, and so the illusion of consensus forms, not from genuine agreement, but from coordinated submission. Even the notion of intellectual bravery is often co-opted by power. Educated people who parrot dominant narratives are praised for being thought leaders or truth tellers, even when their views are indistinguishable from the mainstream. Real dissent, thought that threatens existing power, rarely gets the same platform. It is marginalized, discredited, or labeled as dangerous. Thus, many educated individuals begin to equate conformity with courage and popularity with validity. They lose sight of the original purpose of education, to pursue truth even when it's unpopular. In this way, perception becomes a tool not just for influence but for control. Those who control perception control discourse. And those who control discourse shape reality, not by force but by narrative. Educated individuals, instead of resisting this manipulation, often become its most effective instruments. They lend credibility to questionable ideas. They translate the raw emotional appeals into polished language that institutions can promote. They give power the intellectual veneer it needs to maintain legitimacy. The danger here is not merely that bad ideas spread, but that they become institutionalized, embedded into systems of law, education, and culture. Once that happens, challenging them is no longer just intellectually difficult, it becomes professionally suicidal. And when educated people stop thinking freely because they are afraid to lose power or status, the very foundation of an open society begins to crumble. It is not brute ignorance that enables the rise of destructive ideologies. It is the strategic, calculated, and self-interested silence of those who should know better.